Senator Casey.
Chair Murray, thanks very much, and thanks for having this hearing, both thank you and the ranking member. I wanted to start with an issue which I don't think anyone here or anyone listening would contest, and that's that the pandemic has had a devastating impact on students across the board. There's just no way to calculate that or adequately describe it. That devastating impact on children in our schools is often worse if that child has a disability. And obviously all of you are critically concerned about these issues that relate to children in our schools generally, but in particular with regard to the terrible impact of the pandemic. I wanted to start with Commissioner Russell Tucker to ask you about that focus on children with disabilities, and in particular, children with disabilities in our schools who may not have had access, I should say, to all of their individual education plan services. We know the American Rescue Plan provided dollars to support reopening schools, and about $130 billion, as I recall, and dollars to address the academic challenges students face. It also included additional funding to support students through the IDEA, through those grants. What do you think we need to do, Commissioner, to support the academic renewal of students with disabilities to ensure that they can achieve their academic potential?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And, as I laid out in the testimony, in addition to the IDEA funds and the additional resources, which we're grateful for, that we also tapped into the state's reserve funds to even add to that, because this is so critically important for us to do. We need to listen and hear from families what they're experiencing so we can provide specific supports. We need to hear directly from our school districts about what their challenges are as well, so we can be, again, supporting them in all their needs. Connecticut has 80,000 or so of our students who are students with disabilities, and back to a previous question, about 11,000 of them with dyslexia. So it's really important for us to lean in on our families and hear directly from families what their experiences are and how to support the children. And also from our children, their voices matter as well as we're doing this work.
Could you also expand on the question of how states are using those rescue plan dollars to support students with disabilities, either through the lens of the state of Connecticut or more broadly?
So thank you again. We see in Connecticut that districts are using it for supplementary tutoring and reading instruction. We've also provided individualized in-home supports by organizations that are able to do that, certainly doing more special education evaluations and ensuring that IEPs are indeed implemented, as we know that there were disruptions to that. So working very closely with our districts, those are the things that are emerging, and we're looking to also share those as best practices across the system as well.
Commissioner, thank you. And another question for you as well. I don't think anyone would contest as well that the pandemic was the ultimate emergency and on so many fronts and so many facets of our lives, and in particular for schools and for students and for educators. I have a piece of legislation called Prep for All Students Act, which would make sure that the voices of students and families, students with disabilities and their families, are included in school emergency planning. You've engaged in extensive efforts to get that kind of stakeholder feedback, including parents and students, on how to prioritize the use of elementary and secondary schools emergency relief funds. How would including the voice of students with disabilities and their families help to improve both the quality of emergency or preparedness planning as well as the effectiveness of that planning?
Senator, I always say it cannot be about them without them. And so it's so critically important that they're at the table. And this is what we've championed in our state, hearing from our families of students with disabilities, engaging, frankly, even with their attorneys that are supporting families, so we know exactly what the issues are. So their voice is critically important. It's not an afterthought. It must be a part of the dialogue and conversation. We've got to hear that perspective so that we can craft policies that are not in search of a solution or in search of a problem, but actually addressing a problem that does exist, and it is a real solution with intended results.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks, Chair Murray.
Senator Rosen.